Coming out this evening. It's my pleasure tonight to welcome Ito Romo to our campus and to introduce him to many of you who might be hearing about his fiction for the very first time. I confess that I feel a little simpatico with Ito because I'm actually from South Texas, which is the part of our world Ito writes about. And it's a world that conjures up the familiar and the very strange, as most of the best settings do. Ito lives in San Antonio right now, where I lived until 8th grade, I guess. And mentioned that it's been over 100 degrees down there for the last few weeks, so that's an easy difference to note. You know, the weather affected by it being so far south, different part of the world, and that's a geographical difference, but culturally it's a different world as well, and especially the world that Ito chooses to write about. Perhaps it's emblematic of our 21st century reality because, to paraphrase the New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman, it's hot, flat, and crowded. I'll say not all of South Texas can be described as crowded because there's certainly lots of countryside around. But now that I've lived in the East for many years, whenever I'm back in Texas, and I was back there in February, I'm overwhelmed by the speed of the traffic and just you're usually in cities and just how many people there seems to be, and especially, you know, the Austin to San Antonio corridor. It's just so overwhelming with people. And the traffic jams, and it doesn't really seem to calm down until you get into the countryside, which usually you're on the freeways to get there. Ito uses those arteries of traffic, and principally Interstate 35, that goes north-south all across the state from the Oklahoma border through Dallas and down to Laredo, which he writes about, almost as cultural geographical arteries that pulse with the odd lifeblood of the asphalt-covered land. He uses the interstate as a motif of sorts, a connecting thread that binds the weirdness of its marginalized characters to the commonality of the highways we cross. But what really makes me simpatico with Ito is that so many of his stories have experience that connect directly to some that I've experienced. His story, Baby Money, which is both beautiful and horrible in this great combination. There's a two-headed baby fetus in a jar of formaldehyde exhibited at a carnival. And one of the first poems I ever wrote was titled Carnival Night and featured a deformed LSD baby in a freak show tent. And it was a fake, as all the things in that little creepy little tent were. But Ito makes something greater of that sad carnival freak show tent, as this two-headed baby preserved and exhibited at the carnival gets washed away in a flood and lands in a poor woman's house where she knows there's a $500 reward offered for its return. I like this paragraph particularly when she finds it. The two-headed baby, still in its giant mayonnaise jar, was half buried in the muddy floor. She stared for a long time at the glass jar, tilted on its side in the mud, a ray of sunlight reflecting off the rounded top. That ray of sunlight is a particularly nice touch, a kind of a benediction of sorts. Another one of his stories, From the Border is Burning, Whale Rot, features a whale that's being transported around the country in a refrigerated truck. And I swear, I saw that whale. Although mine was of a different gender, I believe. But I saw that there was a truck coming around, and I guess it came to my small town, and it had a very dead, smaller than you'd imagine, sperm whale in it. And what happens in his story did not happen in my reality, but he makes it so much greater. Ito's fiction has been called Chicano noir and has been identified as grotesque in some quotes, which prompts that famous line from Flannery O'Connor, "Whenever I'm asked why Southern writers particularly have a penchant for writing about freaks, I say it's because we are still able to recognize one." I like that little undercurrent of anger with Flannery O'Connor's quotes all the time. And I have to say, Ito has proven himself to be a kind and gracious man with students the last couple days, as he came to my class yesterday and did a terrific job answering questions about writing and describing his own work. He also told us a few details that I think are fascinating, such as his family has lived in South Texas near Laredo for 9 generations, whereas if Texas has a huge population, we were talking about at dinner, I think it's in the 20 to 25 million range now, and I'd say 18 million of those are from somewhere else, that it's grown so much in the last, few decades. He's the author of 2 outstanding works of fiction, The Bridge and The Border is Burning, and I've heard he is an entertaining reader. So please, let's give a warm welcome for Ito Romo.
Hello. Thank you, Bill, so much for the lovely introduction. And I'd like to say thanks to Allison and Charlotte and Elizabeth also for being such gracious hosts the whole time I've been here. It's been really a very, very nice visit. I also have to thank the students who let me into their classrooms because we had some great conversations too. I also want to thank the Mary E. Rowling's reading series, which made my coming here possible. I think it's important to keep doing that so they don't get rid of programs like this in universities across the country. And of course, I'd love to thank Penn State, because I'm sure they had something to do with my coming here. I've had a really, really great time. I'm not much of a speaker when it comes to reading. I just prefer to read the stories and then maybe answer some questions after all. You might not think that if you heard me talking at the classes this afternoon and the other day, and yesterday, but the one thing I would like to say about the stories is that, for a while, it took me a while to figure out why I was writing the way I was writing. There's kinds of very, very short pieces of fiction that were really dense in feeling and emotion and visually. And when I finally came to terms with it, and I think I mentioned it in class today, was that I wanted students whose attention span has shrank drastically in the last 10 years for me of teaching. And really anybody who still reads, our attention spans have been cut down so short because of the sound bites that we get constantly, and the information comes to us in nice little packaged cases. And so I think what I wanted to do was to get you guys to feel for 7 minutes or 8 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes, which is probably the longest it takes me to read these stories, any one of these stories, to actually feel the poverty and the desperation and the pain and the despair of some of the people in our society which we have marginalized, which we've pushed to the fringes of society so that they're not even in our vision anymore. And for just those few minutes, you're able to live their life, I hope, and maybe have some kind of connection to those people. I just said those people, right? It's as if they're not a part of our world, and it's really what's happened. So the stories are very difficult for me to write, and also very difficult and emotional for me to read too, because they're very realistic in many ways for me, even though they're all fiction, all right? So I'm reading 4 stories, just so you know, and they're so short that you'll be happy. I'm not going to bore you to death either. But the first story that I would like to read tonight is dedicated to the graduate students that I visited with, because for some warped reason in their heads, they left this story about one woman and a man who were in a car and they hate each other so much that they physically hurt each other. This story is called Vacation. He stared intently at the road sign just ahead to the right. His wife squatted outside the car to pee. Although the door was ajar to screen her from oncoming traffic, it did nothing to shield her from the cars and the trucks and the 18-wheelers that were traveling north on I-35. The sign was government green, and its white pearlescent letters sparkled like Christmas lights every time the beacon atop the prison tower on the other side of the road swung around. In the twilight, the prison looked like a giant windowless La Quinta motor inn, surrounded by razor-wired electric fencing that stretched for a mile. Prison area. Do not pick up hitchhikers. He could hear her peeing. It sounded like the water flowing from the filter of the aquarium in their bedroom back home. He watched her pee, stared right at her, knew this would enrage her. The stream of urine reflected the bright red flash of the emergency blinkers he had switched on so no one would crash into them. "Don't look at me," she said, annoyed. He imagined an 18-wheeler smashing into them at 70 miles per hour. "What a way to go," he said softly and giggled at the thought. "What did you say?" she asked. Her eyes flashed red when the tower lights swung around again. "Nothing," he answered. "Can you get me the wipes, please?" she said angrily. "They're in the glove compartment." "Get them yourself," he answered. "Damn it, Victor, just get me the fucking wipes for Christ's sakes," she pleaded, unable to move much. A man in a pickup, zigzagging a bit, drunk, slowed down, honked, and whistled a loud cat call after catching her silhouette in the headlights of his old beat-up truck. She wanted to shoot him the finger, but didn't. Couldn't, really. Victor laughed out loud. He then reached over from the driver's side and popped open the glove compartment. He searched under car manual and map and flashlight and tire gauge and endless sticky wrappers of bite-sized Snickers that she'd been eating throughout the trip until he found the baby blue plastic container. The box was warm, the scent in the air sweet. He threw it at her so hard it put her off balance and pushed her from the delicate, uncertain position she had been holding, butt first, into the puddle of hot urine. She sat in the puddle for 4 swings of the revolver light, counted 1, 2, 3, 4, until she grabbed the door handle and pulled herself back up into position. She was now crying. She was so furious. She reached under the car where the wipes had fallen, grabbed the container, and pulled several napkins out. She too noticed they were warm, then wiped, reaching twice with her free hand, once to remove a sharp embedded pebble, and once to remove a piece of dried South Texas wildgrass. She got back in the car, finally. He put the car into gear and carefully got back on the road after checking for oncoming vehicles. Right as he reached the speed limit and clicked on cruise control, she flung the box of wipes right at him. It hit his ears so hard he lost control of his senses and of the car and swerved into oncoming traffic. The honk and flashing headlights of a giant 18-wheeler up the road brought him to, and he regained control of the car and drove back into the northbound lane. His ears smarted, pulsed red. She stared into the side view mirror. Every time the light of the tower came around, she imagined the puddle of urine glimmering behind them like a mirage on a fiery South Texas summer day. He stared directly ahead, pain still pounding. She peeled another candy bar, popped it whole into her mouth. When she opened the glove compartment to trash the wrapper, the air turned sweet again. At the end of the mile of electric fencing, he saw another sign warning travelers not to pick up hitchhikers. The prison's spinning light flashed hypnotically, faintly now, in the rearview mirror. You can clap. Sounds a little longer when I read it, but it really is 2 pages long. It's a really, really short story. And I'm sorry to say, and not really, but kind of sorry to say that the stories just are going to get more depressing as I go. So I'm just warning you. And I know you guys, especially the students, have a lot of things that you could be doing besides coming to hear me read. So I really appreciate the fact that you're here. The second story I'd like to read This is kind of a dramatic pause. There's a story called Redhead, and it's about a white woman in a brown world. Redhead. Her hair caught fire years ago, Christmas time, as she bent over to light a cigarette on the gas stove one night, stinking drunk. It never grew back right after that, patchy and frizzy and uncombable, so she shaved her head with disposable Bic razors in the shower every other morning. Since she could choose hair color now, she wore a red wig of real human hair she'd found for $35 at the Goodwill store. It had been combed semi-professionally by the Women from Goodwill's Back to Work program. When she'd first seen it, she held it up in front of her and scrutinized it carefully. Her eyesight already beginning to go from old age, then she slipped it on and stared at herself in the mirror. One of the girls working close to the counter was cleaning out an old chest of drawers someone had donated. She looked at her and said, "That's real nice, ma'am, real nice." 2 years later, she wore it still, though now it was uncombed and wild, kind of like the fire. She didn't quit smoking. In fact, she sucked on those cigarettes even more now. Had to have one pack within reach, another waiting in the freezer, always. And this was where she was headed determinedly early that morning, to buy cigarettes at the corner store, and a tall boy. "These damn cigarettes are going to kill me, Johnny. Don't know why you keep selling them to me," she said to the man behind the counter as she popped the beer can open. He smiled, grinned, then chuckled a bit, and pointed to the old yellow State of Texas notice tacked to the wall behind him. "Now, Matilda, you know you can't drink that in here." Then he broke out into a laugh outright. That's when she saw herself in the round mirror, positioned at an angle above the man's head so he could see behind him when he turned his back. She had forgotten to put on her wig. He regained his composure, not sure how she'd react to his laughter. "It's not those cigarettes that are going to kill you, Matilda," he chuckled. "It's that beer." "What are you staring at?" she said gruffly, placing the exact amount she paid every morning, 7 wrinkled dollar bills wrapped around 47 cents change, on the counter. "You keep staring at me, and I'm going to cross the interstate and go buy my cigarettes at the Walmart, and probably get hit by an 18-wheeler while crossing. That'll teach you, make you feel guilty for laughing at a poor old bald woman, huh?" she said, and stormed out the store. An electric bell chimed behind her. 2 years ago, she had turned 60. Then she lost her job. Then she was too old to get another. She used up what she'd saved from working for years without benefits at Woolco, then at the Walmart that had taken its place. The very same Walmart she threatened to take her business to. They'd always managed to schedule her hours just short of qualifying for benefits. Not much you can save on minimum wage. When she'd finally gone through that in a little over a year, her neighbors, the old woman Sofia, who lived with her sister Minerva, down the street, the Saldana family, who went away half the year to work the canning season on Blue Island near Chicago, and the Rodriguez family, who had welcomed her into the garage apartment they'd fixed up to make some extra money from rent. They'd all taken care of her. They'd all taken care of her, bringing tacos and egg sandwiches and leftovers and tamales at Christmas, until she started drinking and stopped eating much. "It's curious that she started drinking at such an age," Mrs. Rodriguez whispered to her husband. "Especially since she never drank before. You know, she told me she never really cared for the booze." She'd said that one day when they had to help her get into the apartment after Matilda thought she'd misplaced her keys. Turns out the keys were in her bosom, wrapped in some crumpled dollar bills. They fell out when she almost fell over, and Mr. Rodriguez caught her in one hand and the keys with the other. At 61 years of age, Matilda Morton resorted to twirling a baton she'd found outside St. Peter's Memorial School on a night when she'd been so drunk she'd lost her way back from drinking on the Mexican side. It was cheaper there. She did this for about a week, stood on the side of the main road leading to the interstate, Far away on the north side of town, 2 bus transfers from her apartment to make sure no one in her neighborhood knew. She imagined herself back in school however many years ago it had been, when she'd been a cheerleader in Lytle, Texas, just south of San Antonio. She found she was still really good at it, or so she thought. She rolled her sleeves as far up her arms as possible to throw that baton up into the heavens and attempt to catch it. People honked and whistled and jeered and threw money. She didn't belong here in the sea of Mexican people, where her pink skin now sagged red under each arm as she tossed the baton from one hand to another. Was she really remembering her youth? Did someone tell her, hey Matilda, if you're going to make any money here, you need some kind of trick, a show like the fire eaters on the Mexican side. If you're going to make it here, you got to have something good enough to make them roll down their windows in this goddamn heat long enough to toss you a coin. You've got to make it worth the air conditioning they lose when they do. She made almost $20 her first day, and more the second, and the third, and the entire week, until the bus driver friend of Mr. Rodriguez told him he thought he recognized the woman who lived in the garage apartment twirling a baton on the side of the road. They jumped in their car, found her, and forced her in. She was woozy and dehydrated. The dangling flesh of her arms sunburned as red as the wig slightly off to the side on her head. Mrs. Rodriguez cried. Why, honey, what you crying for? Matilda asked, then closed her eyes and fell asleep in the back seat, red flesh pulsing something awful. Thank God, a month or so later, she turned 62 and filed for Social Security. Now she spent most of the time at home, drunk, watching TV, except when she took that short walk to the corner store, grocery store, or when she took the trash out every 3 or 4 days, or when she went to the bank downtown to cash her Social Security check. And so it had been that day. She went back to her little apartment, adjusted the wig on her head as she looked into the blotchy mirror in the bathroom, and cursed Johnny for laughing at her. She walked to her bed and reached between the mattress and box spring for the check, which had come in the mail just yesterday. She folded the check, still in its envelope, and slipped it into the hollow of her bra. Do you know anybody like that? Well, she's totally made up, but I would sure love to meet somebody like that. The next story is a story that some of the students here are familiar with. It's a pretty devastating story, so hold on to your britches. It's called Chicken Pot Pie. I may cry. Chicken pot pie. Will Ramirez looked in the rearview mirror to the back seat, eyes focused, opened wide, and scolded 2 of his 3 boys that were sitting in the back. Eat the damn chicken pot pie, for Christ's sakes! They were complaining about the food. He got the pies for them at the truck stop at the exit to Artesia Wells, zapped the pot pies in the micro. He seat-belted the kids back into their seats. 2 in the back, 1 in the front with him, cold Mountain Dew between their knees, a warm pie in each lap, white plastic spoon stuck into each pie, and got back on the highway. But Dad, it looks like vomit, Memo said from the back seat. That's what had brought on the scolding. The pies were cheap, though, and Will Ramirez was determined to save money, especially on food, since the kids would get a late supper at their grandmother's house in Laredo, his ex-wife's mother. He had offered to drive them down there. She was stuck in a seasonal job gift wrapping at the Dillards in the mall downtown. Although the drive was not that long, just 154 miles, gas was expensive. He saved wherever he could. 3 kids and an ex-wife cost a lot. He never had any money left. He loved the boys, though. Loved them in his own way. Macho, hard. They were boys after all, not little sissies. It was dark already. They still had about an hour to go, but the kids said they were hungry, so he stopped. At the truck mart, Memo, the oldest, had said, "We want pizza. There's a Pizza Hut across the street, Dad." He pointed out the huge glass window. "No, corn dogs, Dad," Tony, the one in the middle, had said. "No, Dad, McDonald's. We want McDonald's. McDonald's, Dad, McDonald's." This was Renee, the little one. "The pot pies are better for you. They have vegetables. I'm going to get them and you're going to eat them," he had said. "Better than no damn hot dog and a hell of a lot cheaper than McDonald's or Pizza Hut." "Dad!" they all yelled together. "Be quiet. Go wait in the car, Memo. Take them to the car. Roll down the windows a little. I'll be there in 2 minutes." When he stopped yelling at the kids in the back seat, he looked at René, who was sitting up front with him, to see how he was doing with his chicken pot pie. The kid's eyes were teary. "What's wrong with you?" he said. The kid wasn't eating. "Why are you messing with your food? Do I have to get mad at you too? Eat the damn food, René." Will returned his gaze to the road, angry, biting his lower lip. The little one threw up the 4 spoonfuls of chicken pot pie he had forced swallowed. They went right back into the pie tin. He turned to look at his father, maybe to tell him what had just happened, but nothing came out. He just stared. "Eat the damn chicken pot pie, René," he yelled without turning, then looked into the rearview mirror. "Eat it now, all of you. Finish it all, or I'll turn right back around and go to San Antonio. No damn Christmas vacation for you. We'll go back home and take you back to your mama's house. You guys hear me? I'm tired, worked hard all damn day long just to hand the damn check over to your mother. Now eat your food, you hear me?" "Yes." The radio got snowy. Will pushed in a cassette that was popped halfway out of the player. René was terrified because he knew he had to finish the chicken pot pie or no Christmas. And he had planned for Christmas at his grandmother's all year. His grandmother set up a nativity scene every year in her living room with about 500 miniature figurines in it. And she never said no to him when he asked if he could put something in there, no matter how stupid it seemed to his older brothers. The very first Christmas he could remember at his grandmother's, he had added a dinosaur he'd gotten in a box of cereal during the movie Jurassic Park. So for the last 3 years, he'd searched for months and months before Christmas for the perfect toy, the perfect trinket to add to her nativity scene. Last year, he placed a giant plastic goldfish he traded from a kid in school after show and tell. It was made out of clear, squishy plastic that made the fish look particularly real, except for its size, of course. The giant goldfish hadn't fit into the foil river his grandmother had molded to simulate the water cascading from one level to another. So she went into the kitchen and brought out a big piece of heavy-duty aluminum foil and molded it into a kidney-shaped lake and placed it at the end of the river at the lowest tier, as if the river emptied there. In it, she placed René's plastic fish and said, "See, mijito, it fits perfectly." The huge scene had grown from one small corner to half the size of the room in the 50-plus years his grandmother had been putting it up. This year, he begged his father to take him to McDonald's for his birthday. René didn't particularly like McDonald's. Ketchup made him feel like throwing up. And Will refused a special order for any of his kids. "You should learn to eat your food like a man," he'd say. But the food wasn't the reason he'd wanted to go there. It was the plastic Star Wars figurine he saw advertised on TV, free with every kid's meal that he was after, the Jabba the Hutt. It was the only animal he could think of that she didn't have. He swallowed slowly, spoon after spoon after spoon of thrown-up chicken pot pie until it was all gone. When he had finally finished and felt as if he'd throw up again, he reached to touch Jabba the Hutt tucked away under his thigh. His stomach started to settle. Now he knew his dad would not turn around. Now he could go see his grandmother's nacimiento, and there they'd decide together exactly where among the clay figurines they'd place Jabba. Perhaps among the shepherds and their sheep, or with the farmers and their burros. Maybe with the women balancing trays of bread on their heads, or among the children pulling pails of water or small bundles of wheat on their backs towards the manger. A dreamlike land of sparkling lights and dried moss before him, a miniature universe of crushed paper grocery bags spray-painted to look like stone, darkened ceilings filled with 1,000 silvery stars dangling from invisible wire, tails of silver icicles swinging across the sky like comets every time someone opened the living room door. Here, sitting in front of that nativity scene, René realized what magic was. After a while, Will looked again into the rearview mirror and asked, "You eat your food?" "Yes," they answered. "No, you haven't, Memo," said Tony. "Daddy's lying." "No, I'm not. Don't believe him, Dad. I'm almost finished. Look," Memo said. "Don't stop, Dad. Don't stop. Look, last spoon." He shoved the last piece of crust and 2 tiny pieces of carrot and a pea into his mouth. Will looked at René. He was crying. He felt like throwing up again. "What's the matter with you now?" "Nothing," he answered. "Nothing? Then why are you crying, huh?" "No reason." "Then stop crying. If you have nothing to cry about, then don't cry. Stop crying, damn it. You know what? I have 3 little girls, don't I?" The kids in the back started laughing. "Muchachita," said Memo. "René is a muchachita." "Yeah, muchachita, muchachita, muchachita," chanted Tony. "I'm not a muchachita," said René, clicking open the seatbelt to jump into the back seat, arms flailing, tears flying. "You're a bitch, the both of you. That's what you are, a bitch." Will reached over instantly, slapped the kid on the mouth hard with the back of his hand. Saliva flew onto the back seat. Some landed on Memo's face. He didn't even dare move to wipe it off. René sat back in place. He was bleeding. Tender, tiny lip cut. He didn't say a word. Just looked ahead over the dashboard to the stars in the sky, thought about his abuela, cried silently. Will wrung the steering wheel's rubber cover. He knew what he'd done. Lost control. Just lost control. He flipped on the cabin light, saw the blood. He reached into his back pocket, pulled out his handkerchief, and handed it to the kid. Turned the lights off, stared at the road in front of him. A huge whitetail jumped into the middle of the road and froze. "Dad!" yelled one of the kids from the back seats. "Watch it, Dad!" yelled the other. They barreled right into it. The windshield exploded. Will's eyes filled with shattered glass, then blood and coarse deer hair. He could see nothing, just a bright red glow. One of the headlights had twisted on impact onto the crushed sheet metal of the hood. It was still lit, still wired shining into the car. As tightly as he held onto the steering wheel, he still couldn't control the car. The 2 right wheels grabbed the edge of the road's shoulder like a track. The car must have hit a stone or a break in the asphalt or something, because suddenly it flew off the shoulder into a shallow ditch that acted like a ramp and made the car flip, then roll over twice before landing on its tires, smoking. There was silence for a while. Then Will started to hear cars drive up, doors slam, talking. One man jumped out of his truck and sparked 2 bright red flares in the right-hand lane about 50 feet from the huge mangled buck, which someone was already pulling by a leg off the interstate. The deer's antlers left white trails as if a giant had scratched his nails against the asphalt like a chalkboard. Will reached over instinctively. The seat was empty. He brushed deer hair off his face and blood. He wasn't sure if it was the deer's blood or his own. "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," he yelled. He unfastened his belt, hurt, but still scooted over and patted the floorboard to see if the kid was there. Nothing. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, he said again. He reached over the car seat to the back, almost jumped over, but felt a pain so severe in his stomach that he bent forward and threw up. He spat a few times and turned again, reached over the seat despite the pain, touched Memo's legs, then Tony's, yelled at them, "You guys all right?" There was no answer. Rene, you back there, hijito?" There was no answer. He pulled himself over the seat as much as he could. The pain made him black out for a minute. He forced himself back too, pulled himself over, felt around the floor, around Memo's legs, over the hump in the middle, under Tony's legs. Nothing. He pulled himself back into his seat, reached at the windshield, knew what he was looking for, knew there'd be a big hole. He could feel the unusually cool South Texas winter breeze before he made contact with the heated hood. Then, with the little glass that was left along the edges, cut himself, blacked out again. Almost immediately he came back to, his hand on the hot hood. The headlights still bright. He imagined the huge hole in the red glow. Someone was at the car door. "You all right? Everybody all right?" "Yes, no, my kids, they're in the back. Check on him, please. The little one, Renee, I can't find him. Find him, please. I can't see. Please help me find him." Will reached at the man's shirt and gripped it, then let go. "Help me, please. Help me find the little one. Get the kids out of here, please. I smell gas. Do you smell gas? Please get them out of here. Get them some help. Do you have a phone? Call the cops, the ambulance. Please help the ones in the back, please." The man at the door turned to listen to another person yelling something at him. Will's bloody hand was printed onto his shirt. You could see it clearly in the bright headlight lighting up the whole bloody scene. The man walked off towards the person yelling at him. Will thought he heard the word child. He pulled himself up, closer to the door to hear better, couldn't hold it, folded over. He slowly, painfully moved his hand back to the passenger side, started feeling around again in vain. His fingers brushed the handkerchief. He grabbed for it, knew immediately what it was, still folded thick, took it in his hand, put it to his face, breathed in deeply. His other hand, back to searching aimlessly, found Jabba the Hutt. I think I get too excited when I'm reading, and I can't stop perspiring. You want to hear one more? Yeah? Okay. This one's not as mean. But it speaks to that world which I grew up in, and that world in which my family has lived since 1750, before the United States was, before Texas was a part of the United States. It speaks about that world where I used to be able to cross to the Mexican side, and half my friends lived there, and where I learned what it was to get drunk for the first time, and where we would go see the dentist and get our boots shined, and just as if it was a part of our own city. And for the past maybe 10 or more years, nobody in my family has stepped on the Mexican side, even after 9 generations of moving freely from one side to the other. And it is because of drugs. You can make your own decisions about whether drugs should be legalized or not, but there's one thing that we always tend to forget as Americans, is that we are the main users of these drugs. We are the ones who are asking for them to come to this side. And what's happening on the Mexican side is devastating, yeah, really and truly devastating. So this addresses it, I think, in a way that is a little lighter than the other stories that I've read, but I think that you still just look at the feeling of what's really happening on the border. Okay? This is the title story from the book. It's called "The Border is Burning." And the border is burning, not so much literally, although on the Mexican side, things do burn. Grenades go off, bazookas are used, and crazy stuff that you would never imagine. But the whole border area in Texas is burning in many other ways. Lack of education, no access to education, poverty, beyond third world countries. Just the conditions are unbearable and unbelievable. If you have any time to get on your machines and look up, for example, I told the class the other day to look up the word colonias, C-O-L, like colonize, but colonias, yeah? You'll see some of these places where people live without plumbing and no electricity and no running water in the United States of America. And I think it's a real shame, yeah? Okay. The border is burning. Everybody sleeps. At some point, everybody needs to sleep. Gonzalo Gonzalez needed sleep badly, and cash, a lot of it, around 16 grand. As he started getting closer to his neighborhood, he saw a thin plume of smoke on the horizon. White smoke, then gray smoke, then white smoke again against the dark, almost blue-black sky. The sirens got louder and louder as he got closer and closer to his home. But he knew already. He knew it was his house burning, and he knew who started the fire. He should have known better, really, but Gonzalo Gonzalez broke the first rule of dealing: don't use. A couple months back, early evening, he cut 2 fat lines with his debit card, one for his friend Weasel Valdez and one for himself. 2 lines that started a weekend binge that he regretted the minute the shit hit the back of his throat. When he realized how much he and Weasel had done, he got so nervous, so obsessed with trying to figure out how he was going to pay them back, that he kept doing more. Weasel got so scared he split. His supplier had told him to come in, but made him sweat it out for 3 days. 3 long days before he got the call. Gonzalo only knew the guy as Jerry, and although he'd only been moving coca for them for 6, maybe 7 months, Jerry told him, "Relax, we'll carry you for a couple of weeks," and fronted him more cocaine, a couple $1,000s worth, after Gonzalo promised to get it back to them in a week. "You give us all you make, your cut too. Then we'll do it again the next week, and we'll keep doing it this way, and if everything goes all right, then you'll be paid up real quick, and you can start making some cash for yourself." I don't know why I have to use that voice, but it seems to work. "No, man, I'll move it for you, no problem, I promise. You know I'm good, you know I can move this shit," he said, almost crying. So on his way back home that hot afternoon, right before he got back on I-35, he pulled into La Marquesa Apartments on Guatemala Street, drove to the end of a building with a giant number 7 painted across a wall of bricks, and reversed his truck into a spot under the shade of a big pecan tree. There he could see if anyone was coming. He pulled out one of the big plastic bags they'd fronted him, fiddled with the zip seal for what seemed like a long time because he was so drained. He had to have a little, just a little, after what he'd just been through, after being up and worried for so many days. When he finally got it open, Gonzalo pulled his key from the ignition, loaded up a big bump, and put the key up to his nose while he looked at himself in the rearview mirror to make sure it was right at the nostril so he wouldn't lose any. Then almost immediately he dug back in and took another hit to the other nostril. He calmed down, took a deep breath, felt the back of his throat start to numb up again, then went back in for another round. Just a little more, a little more. Gonzalo then licked the key clean, pushed it back into the ignition, and headed home. When he got back to his house that afternoon, he called Weasel, who showed up at the front porch within the hour, a couple of 6-packs and a couple $100. They promised each other they'd only do $200 worth of the stuff. But the binge lasted all weekend, and now he owed them so much money, he knew he could never pay them back. When he was called in again, no 3-day wait this time, El Crazy Marines squeezed his throat tight against the wall. He squeezed so hard Gonzalo Gonzalez agreed to the deal. to be a mule. Just once, promised Jerry, as he motioned for Marines to let Gonzalo go. Really simple. Go across the bridge, pick up the stuff, walk it back across. Easy, he promised, just one time. They asked him his shoe size and what size belt he wore, and told him to go home, have a beer, relax, try and get some sleep. But he didn't. Didn't sleep for days. He walked around, wound up on adrenaline, his shirt buttoned all the way up to hide the 5 fat finger marks around his neck. Marines showed up unannounced at Gonzalo's house one afternoon a few days later. He whispered an address on the Mexican side into his ear, explained exactly how to get there. Not too far off the Mercado, not more than 5 or 6 blocks from the bridge, a few blocks off Guerrero. When you get there, just knock. They know who you are. They know you're coming. When you get inside, ask to use the bathroom. They'll take you. Inside the bathroom, there's a pair of shoes your size and a belt. Take off your shoes and put on those. Take off your belt and put on the one that's there. Walk back across the bridge and go to San Agustin Plaza, and we'll be there to pick you up. Gonzalo was really scared. No one went across anymore. It was way too dangerous. No one. When do you want me to go? Now, he said. Go now. He did it. Quickly and without incident. In less than 2 hours, Gonzalo Gonzalez set foot back on American soil late that afternoon. Anxious and nervous and feeling like he wanted to vomit, he steadied himself to cross Grant Street and walked the half block to the plaza in front of the cathedral. He could see Marines feeding coins into the parking meter. Gonzalo made his way up to him. Marines saw him coming and held open the backseat door of a rusty silver Toyota and pointed him in. He slid across the seat. On the seat, there were a pair of black tennis shoes. As Gonzalo slipped off the loafers he'd found waiting for him in the bathroom across the river, Marines stuck his head in through the window and whispered, "Don't forget the belt, too." After he'd changed shoes, Gonzalo took off the belt and rolled it up tight and pushed it into one of the loafers. Marines peeked his head in again and said, "Go home, get the hell out of here." Gonzalo attempted to open the door, but El Crazy said, "No, get out on that side, the other side. Look out for cars when you open the door. Hey, and get some sleep. You look like shit." The evening sun had just set. Gonzalo Gonzalez, still several blocks away from his house, felt a burning in his throat, an acrid taste at the base of his tongue, coming up and stinging. He walked slowly, but he knew already. He knew exactly where the smoke was coming from. He wasn't looking, not really. He was afraid to look. So he stared directly in front of him, stared straight ahead into nowhere, into nothing, into the darkness, thick. As he turned the corner, the reflection of a bright orange glow erupted onto his pupils, into the pupils of his dark brown eyes. The smoke that billowed from his burning house finally hit him, swirled at his nose, down inside each nostril, burned the back of his throat, made him cough. Then the flashing red lights brought him to. Cops stood on either side of the blocked-off street. A reporter on the sidewalk stood as close to the burning house as the firefighters would let him. Neighbors, even some who lived too far away to be real neighbors, huddled, staring at the roaring fire. Gonzalo focused on a woman making the sign of the cross in the orange glow. He glided through the small crowd until a cop yelled at him, "All right, far enough, that's far enough." His neighbor and his neighbor's wife, an elderly couple he'd known all his life, old friends of his parents, whose house he had inherited and now lived in, or used to live in, came to comfort him. As if on signal, the reporter rushed over, cameraman running behind him, light man with battery and light and battery pack and light running behind him. The old woman pushed her hand open against the camera lens. Her husband barked at the reporter, "Leave him alone! Get the hell out of here!" Just like he'd heard on the live cop shows on TV. The cameraman pulled away. The reporter repositioned himself to continue taping at a distance. Gonzalo, now, as if in a trance, stared directly into the camera. We've been told by neighbors that this young man who just arrived at the scene is the owner of the house that has now been almost completely destroyed by the fire. Suddenly, the flames caused a firestorm of sorts, a wind all of its own that made the huge flames spin and churn and suddenly leap out toward the streets like flare-ups on the sun. The fire barely touched one of the few surviving palm trees the city had planted on the sidewalk all along the neighborhood many years ago. It caught fire quickly. The cameraman pointed his camera at the burning palm tree. Somebody gasped. Gonzalo, still in a daze, watched as one of the dried lower palm fronds burned, snapped, then floated off the tree like a falling kite, oscillating all akimbo. The glowing end of the frond lit a red line in the darkness like fluorescent tempera. The cameraman took 2 or 3 quick steps back when he realized that the frond was coming right down at him, but it was too late. The thorns that ran along the palm's frond stem stuck sharply into his flesh. He fell to his knees, more in shock than in pain, and managed to lay the camera somewhat gently onto the hot, softened blacktop. Then a loud boom exploded from the Mexican side. "That was really close," the reporter yelled. "Get the first aid kit," the cameraman pleaded. 7 more thundering blasts, one right after the other, echoed across the river, then flashed like lightning across the sky. I think that's about as much as we can take. Are there any questions? It's the last word for me. It's a little shocking, huh? And even more shocking to hear it read. Yes?
As I was listening to the stories, I was thinking about what you said about your sort of intention of trying to make these marginal people comprehensible or human.
Real. Yeah.
Okay. Do you ever wonder about, and I don't think you've done this, but I just wonder if this is something you think about, the possibility of making them seem
Even further away.
spectacle, or yeah.
Yeah,
more-
that's a question I get often, and the truth of the matter is that I don't want to treat my characters with any kind of special, I don't want to treat them with gloves. I want to paint them the way they really are. That story with the kids in the car, you think at first it's your typical Mexican American abuelita story, right? Where they're all just going to visit their grandmother. When it really, in fact, it's not about that at all. And the shocking end is what really brings you down to the reality of their state, the state of that family and the state of everything, And so I promised myself that I wouldn't sugarcoat anything that I wrote. And so I read in Laredo, which is where I'm from, and I read at Texas A&M University there. One of my brothers teaches there. And a student asked me the similar question, which was, do you think that you're creating more stereotypes by painting this Mexican American as a drug dealer? Well, hello, But the problem is this, that it's not a stereotype. Some of that is very, very real. But the circumstances of the landscape is what makes it real. And the circumstances of their birth is what makes it real. And the circumstances of their poverty is what makes it real. And I'm trying to get to that part of the character and that part of humanity so that we see it as a real thing, no longer just that stereotype of the Mexican-American drug dealer, but all those intricacies which have been put into place. If you live on the border, you are caught in this world. Obviously not us. I think we're all, I hate to use the word blessed, but we're all very lucky in so many ways. But so many people are caught between that world of clean money versus dirty money, And there is a real, what's called, and people write about this, narco-economics. You know, it's real. It's huge. I told the class earlier, not today, but yesterday, that there is more money traded in drugs in the world every year than oil. And that should kind of like wake us up. And I'm afraid that it doesn't. So I understand the point that you're making, and I want to be very delicate, and I'm glad that I get a chance to explain it. But I also don't want to sugarcoat things. This is the reality, you know. The truth is, if you're going to talk about meth, for example, meth is from North Texas, Lubbock, Texas, the suburbs. That's where it started, you know. That's where you found the real cookers, or whatever they're called, right? The real cooks of meth. And so I can't, now I can paint the Mexican Americans selling the meth because the cartels got wind of it and now are making meth in amazingly huge numbers and bringing it back into the United States. At the same time, when you're no longer able to buy cold medication off over the counter because you can't do that anymore because it was part of the whole meth trade. So the meth trade is a white thing. If I wrote about it, I don't feel like I'd be making a character that's unreal either, too. And we see it in the popular television show, right? We were just talking about it, dinner. What is the name of it?
Breaking Bad.
Breaking Bad, yeah. I mean, I hope that helps it answer, makes the point. And it was particularly hard to answer that in Laredo because, you know, this is 99.9% Mexican American and a place where my family has lived for so many generations. But we have to face the truth, the honest to God truth, and see that this is real, you know, very, very real, and a real problem.
I wonder if that would feel different if it weren't your home place, like if it were somebody from outside writing about.
I wonder if the students would ask the same questions, you know, I wonder if they would ask the same questions, because they're kind of calling me on it, you know, aren't you creating more stereotypes?
Right.
And, yeah, but I mean, in a sense, I'm not creating the stereotype that some white writers have made of the Mexican with a big sombrero and the Frito Bandito and that kind of stuff. This at least has some kind of basis in reality, and it's a real cause for problems in South Texas. Huge, huge cause. Great question and great point, yeah.
I have a question. Do you think that your stories come across as less shocking to people who are familiar with the setting of South Texas and are familiar with sort of the lifestyle there, or do you think it's about the same shock value?
No, I mean, I think we've all been so desensitized from all of it that even people in Laredo, I mean, I read to huge auditorium, maybe 5 times the size of this, packed with students from the university, and they were just as shocked,
Yeah.
you know, because they're just as desensitized as the rest of us are, and they live on the border. But there is a real difference between the Mexican side and the American side. The American side is safe, yeah. I don't know if you guys know or not, but El Paso, the American side of Juarez, is one of the safest cities in the United States. And it's one of the most dangerous, Juarez on the other hand, is one of the most dangerous cities in the world. Yeah. But the American side is safe. So they're just as shocked, you know, and they're just as separated from that world too. But I ask my students every semester, do you have access to any drug you want? Could you get any drug you wanted within the next 3 days? They all say yes. And I have a feeling it's the same here. Yeah? There's a huge, huge market that is so easy. It's like going out buying a soda. And yet our politicians and the rest of us act as if it's this war on drugs that we're winning, or is non-existent, or we can still wipe them out. And the truth is that's not quite the case. So yeah, it's still just as shocking. You had a question?
Yeah, I was just thinking, you know, the singer-songwriter Tom Russell has written about the border drug problem, and you know, the Chilean author Roberto Bolano has written about it. But why do you think America has such a hunger for illicit drugs, particularly, it seems, uppers, although heroin is
Heroin is
huge.
has had a huge what do you call it, new life, especially
Have you
in South
thought
Texas.
about why we seem to be the major consumer of illicit drugs in
Yeah.
the world? Why?
You know, I wish I could answer that. I mean, it's not the part of my life where I'm an expert in. And I'm not so sure that it's just the United States. I think that in the United States, we have the money available to young people. So almost everybody has money in their pocket that they can use pretty freely, you know. And I also feel that with the lack of jobs, that these are real jobs that people take selling drugs, you know, and they live off of it. And I was telling the class also